Bismillah walhamdulillah Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Send in the Community with me, Hafiz Muhammad Umar. And in today's show, we will be talking about autism in particular, because this month, April, has been traditionally marked as the Autism Awareness Month, and in most recent years that terminology changed towards Autism Acceptance Month or Autism Acceptance and Awareness Month. And the whole idea is to raise awareness of autism as a condition, and what are the barriers to learning or understanding for individuals with autism. That could be children from as early as from birth onwards, really. Some of them perhaps might develop the condition from a young age, perhaps in their infancy or through early life milestones or goals. And health workers that work with new mothers might raise a concern, and others might not necessarily be a cause for concern until they get into nursery or even reception at school when they are in full-time education. And yet others might exhibit certain trends or particular routines which might pose a challenge either to the learning or forming friendship groups, or struggles in social situations, which might then perhaps suggest that further investigation may be required. And usually an educational psychologist might then be given a referral for the individual to be assessed. So we are going to be talking a bit about how that process works, and also how the condition can still allow individuals to achieve their full potential in terms of their education, health, and also employment, and living an ordinary yet remarkable life as an adult as well. So we are going to be talking about autism, what it is, how it manifests itself, what are the early signs to look for, and also perhaps if you as a listener are somebody who has been diagnosed with the condition and you want to be sharing your thoughts, you can ring into the studio. It is Wednesday, the 9th of April 2025 today, and we are running this show live from our studios at Inspire at the Dallar Community Centre, Dallar Road here in Luton. So you can call into the studio on 01582 481822. That's 01582 481822. Or you could WhatsApp us on 07779 481822. That's 07779 481822. And we'd love to be able to have you sharing your thoughts, whether you are a person who's been diagnosed with autism either on its own or with another condition. It could be ADHD, it could be any other condition, dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc., alongside autism, and whether autism is your primary need or secondary need. We'd love to be able to hear from you. Or if you are perhaps a parent or a carer of a person with autism, what is it like for them? What are their routines like? I know last week we talked about Ramadan and how that routine, when it changes, particularly for people with special education needs and disabilities, including autism, that can be quite traumatic. Most of us are very excited about the prospect of Ramadan, yet there are some individuals within our communities, through no fault of their own, perhaps might have greater anxieties about Ramadan, not because it's Ramadan, but because of the changes to the routine. How long does it take for them to fully prepare for that change of routine? Then once Ramadan started, how the routine was like for them. If you tuned in last week, you would have you would recall that my younger brother Raz was here with me talking about his routine for Ramadan, pre-Ramadan, during Ramadan, and post-Ramadan, and how that's working out for him. And certainly, Raz has Down syndrome and also visual impairment. But then those with autism, for them perhaps there might be greater needs or lesser needs, and that depends on how far on the spectrum they are. And so we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. The number to call again is 01582481822. It is Wednesday, the 9th of April 2025 today, and we are doing this shortened version of the show live today. I say shortened because the second half of today's show is going to be dedicated towards the Shawwal Iftari show, which those that are fasting are going to be able to tune into, inshallah, from 7:30 onwards. And if you are, wanting to get through Shawwal fasting Mondays and Thursdays, inshallah, I'm sure you'll be fasting tomorrow, and that can quite easily cover your full 6 days of fasting during Shawwal as well. But if you are already into a week, then that iftari show is there for you. But if you are not fasting and still wanting to tune in, please make sure you stay tuned from 7:30 onwards. So second half of today's show will be dedicated to the Shawwal Iftar show. So we are going to be taking this time to explore what autism is, and also what is the help, support, and advice available out there. So I will start with autism as a condition. Autism or autism spectrum disorder, or sometimes known as autism spectrum condition, is a neurodevelopmental condition characterized by challenges with social interaction, communication, and repetitive behaviors or interests. It is a spectrum, meaning the severity and presentation of symptoms vary greatly from person to person. And some key characteristics of autism. Again, this is not going to be exactly the same for every single individual, but it will vary from person to person, which is why it is so crucial to have that direct involvement through either your GP or a Senko at your child's school, who would liaise very closely with the members of staff teaching or supporting your child, and also perhaps with the educational psychologist once the assessment is carried out. So in terms of the key characteristics, social communication and interaction, individuals with autism may find it difficult to understand social cues. And that means in a social situation, they might find it difficult to engage. One common situation might be when you're asking somebody to make eye contact or look at me when I'm talking to you. Well, actually, somebody with autism might find it incredibly difficult to do that. I remember in a school situation once talking to young people with autism and asking them, how do you often respond when a member of staff is asking you to pay attention and look at them when they're talking to you? You think most teachers or teaching staff would be familiar with individuals in their school with a diagnosed condition. But as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we don't pick up on those early warning signs until even they get to secondary age. So this particular young person was telling me that, when a member of staff was asking me and insisting that I look at them, when they're talking to me, I couldn't quite work out which eye I should be looking at, the left eye or the right eye. Subhanallah, it's something that we take much for granted. We talk to each other, we are naturally looking at people, and we think, that's an obvious thing to do. Yet somebody with autism might even really struggle with that, because they are really literal and taking things quite literally a lot of the times as well. Again, it's a condition that is very wide, so depending on where they are on the spectrum. So they're the kind of things to be conscious of. Individuals with autism may also find it difficult to understand or engage in reciprocal conversations or form and maintain relationships. I touched base earlier on social situations, and also any kind of relationships, whether it's relationships with the siblings, with the peer friendship groups, etc. And sometimes they feel everything literally has to have a structure, and they struggle so much in unstructured situations. So again, with me being a Senko, I can liaise back to school situations. So early morning routines, once they get into school, for example, they might struggle to make an ordinary start to the day. In most primary schools, young people with autism are given a very clear timetable, which might be visual, which tells them exactly what to expect once they get to the school day, and then into the school premises rather. And once they get to secondary age, that transition period is usually quite crucial. So if your child is in year five, for example, and you're thinking about secondary schools, I would say that is the time to actually go and attend these year seven or high school open evenings, open mornings, to look at what those school settings are. Reach out for the SDN department for the second in particular. Tell them your child has autism or any other diagnosed condition, and that you are interested in knowing what kind of support they could provide. Um, and if your child has an education healthcare plan, then really by the end of year five, you want to be really quite clear on which local school might be the best school to meet the needs of your young person. In Luton, we are incredibly lucky. We have so many amazing schools. The Chiltern Learning Trust is one trust that is very successful in our local area throughout the whole of Bedfordshire. And then we have other amazing schools, and including special schools like Woodlands, for example, who offers so much support for young people. And you just got to make sure that you are clear on what the offer is for your young person. I would say don't limit it to Luton only. If your child has an education healthcare plan, please do visit schools in the neighbouring towns as well, including Dunstable, which has an excellent provision there, and then see what that might look like. Nothing stops you from visiting these neighbouring schools. You just want to make sure that once you come to the annual review of your child's education healthcare plan in year six, the educational setting has to be named by law, and you name the best provision for your child. And the only way you can do that is not just looking at the website, but actually making a physical visit to the school. Take your child with you so that they know that there is going to be this transition period from primary to secondary school. What will that entail? What will that look like for them? And then more importantly, what will that particular provision do to ensure that your child is able to get the best possible experience out of their provision at secondary stage? And if I go back to what I said a little earlier about some students, who may not have their condition formally diagnosed in a primary school, the paperwork or the feedback from teaching staff is crucial. That has to be passed on to the secondary school. And usually for young people with special education needs and disabilities, once they've been allocated a secondary school, they would be entitled to additional transition days. It might involve in a series of days, it might involve a few mornings perhaps, with familiar staff from primary school, taking them into secondary school and then introducing them to the secondary school staff who would be working very closely with them. And that process becomes quite gradual. Please be prepared to support that. If you as parents want to be attending one or two of those additional transition days, again, liaise with your schools to ensure that they are aware that you want to be involved. And once that has taken place, that would better prepare your child for secondary education. And within the secondary education, the main changes that come in is the size of the school quite often. So in a smaller primary school, they might have 2 or 3 form entry. School in Luton, I think some of our larger schools like Downside Primary School, for example, is a 5 form entry, which means there are 5 classes in each year group, or they used to be. There might be 4 now. It's been a while since I last checked, but certainly I think there are other neighbouring schools which have 3 to 4 forms per year group. Once they get to secondary school, that might become double in size. There might be 8 to 9 forms per year group, and then that gives you the scope of how big the schools are. And then if you go 250 plus children in one year group alone, going to a particular part of the corridor to attend to their lockers, etc. And that can be quite overwhelming, especially for young people with autism. And what you as a parent then want is to have a designated, quieter area where the young person with added needs autism can actually go to start the day quietly. In my last couple of secondary schools, we quite happily had those quieter starting areas for young people with special education needs and disabilities, including autism, within the SCN department, where they could touch base in the morning, about half an hour before even the start of school, 8 o'clock onwards. I had dedicated learning support assistance timetable each morning from 8 o'clock, where young people could come in, they could touch base with them, they could leave their belongings there if they wanted to, and then really start the day in a very calm, orderly manner. And they would also be given timeout passes if they needed to for during the day if things were getting overwhelmed for them. So they had the permission to be able to come back and touch base with a familiar member of staff before starting again. And the whole point was we want them to be able to access the education in the best way possible. Again, and break times for those that struggled to go outside in the playground with anything between 1,000 to 1,500 other students. They had smaller, quieter breakout rooms where they could go a break time, have a snack, play board games, or just touch base with a familiar member of staff. Lunchtime as well, perhaps, if they had a difficulty in eating their lunch in a very large open canteen, they could either bring a packed lunch or bring a cold lunch from the canteen to a designated quieter area, which would always be supervised at lunchtime to ensure that they're able to eat their lunch in a smaller, quieter area, and they are not getting as overwhelmed as they would be if they weren't in that kind of a more structured environment. And certainly, when it comes to routines, changing from a primary school to a secondary school routine can be quite overwhelming. Again, speak to the Senko in your child's secondary school. In April, you would have perhaps been given the name of the school that your child is going to be going to in September. And if they have autism or any other diagnosis of any condition, then by now you should have at the very least been given the name of the Senko at the secondary school. Please liaise with them. Arrange a meeting with them if you possibly can in person. Great, if not, at least over the phone. Tell them what your child's barriers to learning are, and also what you feel are the strategies to support at this moment in time in primary school, and how can you work with the school to better prepare your child for the transition into secondary school in September. And some schools will give a full preparation packs for the summer holidays for them to work through their own leisure during the summer holidays to better prepare themselves for that big transition in September. Others, as I said earlier, might invite you in for more than one transition day, and they would walk around the school building, show them how the lesson changeover works at the end of each lesson, as opposed to staying in one classroom in primary school, how the need for bringing in your PE kit, etc. works. And you might not necessarily need it for the whole day, but just for the PE lesson, making sure you remember to bring it in, take it back at the end of the school day. And also any additional therapy that your child might be entitled to can be factored in. That includes things like speech and language therapy, for example. If they are having that in primary school, or you feel they may benefit from, again, please speak to the Senkos both in primary and secondary school, and just make sure that the full files for the children from primary school are handed over to secondary schools, and so that they can be fully prepared in welcoming the child in September. So that's the transition period, which is quite crucial, and that will also eliminate some of those social anxieties. And in return, what that will also do is better prepare the school, the young person, and the student profile, sometimes referred to as pupil passport in primary school, is quite crucial. It's usually a 1 to 2 page document which lists key information about the young person, their name, quite often their picture, so they're easily identified, and then what the primary need is, what the secondary need is, and what are the barriers to the learning, what are the strategies to support, and also the young person's own views. That is critical. That has to be the center of everything we do to ensure that the young person has a say in how they are supported. And then views of the parents and carers are quite important. And then that is usually circulated to all members of staff that are likely to come in contact with that young person, and to be sure that they are fully prepared for them. Other key characteristics to bear in mind include restricted repetitive behaviors and interests. Young people with autism might exhibit repetitive movements, speech patterns, or have intense interest in specific topics or objects. Again, I think it's really, really important to know what their interest is. And that is quite an important one. If the interest is cars, or I had one young person with autism in the past. He was very fond of Eddie Murphy. So that was his thing. Um, and how could you then use that to your advantage, right? Okay, well, if you're doing any activities and you refer back to Eddie Murphy, and perhaps if it's I don't know, setting a story in English, for example, include Eddie Murphy as a character, that would excite him, and take it from there. Um, and another person who had interest in video games, again making sure that you are able to use that wisely, and bring it into teaching and learning as much as possible. And you just got to make sure that you're able to work around them, and then just be cautious the fact that if their interests are things that might not be necessarily safe, then we've got to be able to have the conversation, seek professional help in helping them to come out of those kind of interests, please. Another key characteristic could be sensory sensitivities. Some individuals with autism may have heightened or diminished sensitivities rather to sensory input like sounds, lights, or texture, or smell even. And we've got to make sure we as adults are fully conscious of that. I mentioned earlier about Ramadan, and how even sensitivities around smell could be a big deal for them. Smell of food at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, for example. That's unheard of for the rest of the year. Ramadan, if you're in bed and suddenly you smell this food and you think, what on earth is going on? That is why those conversations are so crucial. I had during the months of Rajab and Shaban as well. Sit them down. This is what's happening. Ramadan is coming up. We will be eating much earlier. We won't be eating during the day. We'll be eating at the end. And if they are able to fast, alhamdulillah. If they are unable to fast, alhamdulillah. Still, but make sure that they are part of the conversation around the change to the routine. The last thing you want is for them to suddenly be woken up by the smell of food and thinking, what on earth is going on? Again, and the sensitivity around noise, perhaps people talking a lot more in the morning, somebody reading the Quran out loud, maybe, what's going on. Again, that conversation is so important to have had. And Around lights as well, suddenly the whole house is pretty much lit up early in the morning. What is going on? And then the Amul Layl or Tarawih late into the evening. Now, alhamdulillah, Ramadan isn't as late, but a few years ago, 10 years ago perhaps, we had Ramadan during the summer. And I know for a fact that when we used to finish Tarawih around midnight or thereafter, some people who were closing fast a little bit earlier, but perhaps preparing for Saturday straight away. So all that was a massive change in routine, and again helping young people with autism to recognize the fact that Ramadan goes back roughly 10 days each year, and these routines do change every year. Um, and then other key characteristics are around varied abilities. So people with autism have a wide range of abilities, with some individuals having intellectual disabilities while others are highly intelligent. And never underestimate the strengths of people with special education needs and disabilities. Quite often in the world of special education needs and disabilities, we ask for people to look for their ability rather than their disability. And somebody recently asked me about any tips on memorizing the Quran. And subhanallah, from my experience, young people with autism are usually brilliant with the memory. Allah has given them that as a superpower. I have to say, yeah, they have this photographic memory. And if you are wanting a young person with autism to maybe memorize the Quran, give them a small challenge with few surahs. See how they find that, and they see how quickly they, mashallah, are able to outsmart those who think they are perhaps above them. And you've got to be able to make sure that we are able to encourage them and use their strengths in the right way. And I often say to young people with special education needs and disabilities, whatever your condition is, don't be put off by it. This is a superpower that Allah has given you. And please appreciate that, value that, treasure that, and see how that actually helps you. Other characteristics include lifelong condition, bearing in mind that autism is a lifelong condition, meaning symptoms generally appear in early childhood and can persist throughout a person's life. So it's not something that goes away. And that's where, unfortunately, I do have an issue with the government when they say the education healthcare plans and the code of practice for special education needs is from 0 to 25. Well, what happens at the age of 26 and beyond? These are lifelong conditions, and that is something that I would urge our local and national politicians to try and get the government to think about very carefully. It should be a lifelong provision, and not just until the age of 25. And then the diagnosis, as I mentioned earlier, while autism can be diagnosed at any age, the features of autism often appear during early childhood, and as a reliable diagnosis is usually possible at the age of 2 years, but can take a lot longer. We are coming to the end of the show because, as I mentioned earlier, this is a shortened show because we are giving preference to the Shawwal Iftari show, which will start straight after 7:30. I hope that's given you an indication of what autism is about and how we can better educate, better prepare ourselves to support young people and other adults with autism within our communities. It is a hidden condition. You can't necessarily tell whether a person has autism or not just by looking at them. That is why it's even more important for us to better educate ourselves. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the strength to be able to understand autism and support those with it. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.